singing together in this way. Beautiful. And I can tell you, as a listener, it's really uplifting. It kind of renews one. This is what art does. It gives you a new feeling of being alive. And what you're doing is more than worthwhile. It's special, it's sacred. So I wanted to talk a little bit, I've been asked to talk about the purpose of art, which is a kind of title that sort of set me bristling a little bit. So I'll tell you why as we move on. But what I wanted to do was just to share some little bits of music with you and perhaps just touch on some feelings about art and music and being an artist generally, which I've gathered over 50 years as a professional actor. I've had some lovely experiences in that time. I've travelled the world and performed on stages in New York, in London, and all over the world. And it's been a great adventure, and pretty tough at times too, and I'll tell you about that as well. But here is a very good place to start, and we're going to just press a button and hope that some music comes out of these speakers. The best proof we have that life is good and that therefore there may be a God after all who has our welfare at heart is that to each of us on the day we were born comes the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. It comes as a gift, unearned, unmerited, for free. How I would like to speak just once to that man, dead now these many years. See how we in the 21st century still play your music, how we revere and love it, how we are absorbed and moved and fortified and made joyful by it. J.M. Coetzee, the South African novelist, from his book, The Diary of a Bad Year. Doesn't that touch a chord in each of us when you hear that glorious music from centuries ago? And I always reflect that Bach fell almost instantly into obscurity after his death and was only revived maybe 200 years later by people like Mendelssohn in Germany, who found a butcher wrapping meat in Bach manuscripts. Much of Bach's music was lost if it hadn't been for Anna Magdalena Bach, his wife, who collected a lot of his music. Upon his death, some of the copper plates of which were engraved, this is how they were printed, were melted down by his sons to pay for the coal to keep them warm in the next winter. things were back then. And yet we still now have access to so much of this glorious, glorious music. And it reflects also on how hard it is often for artists to make their way in the world, because ears are not always responsive sometimes. There is a kind of deafness abroad. I don't want to try and talk about art in any specific terms, because there's absolutely no way of doing that. Because art is a mystery. And the reason it's a mystery is that it is a spiritual impulse. It is something that springs from an unknown source that inspires us all. It's there for us all. Art is not the exclusive province of anyone. It belongs to everybody. The artist lives in every soul. The ability to appreciate art lives in every person, no matter what culture they belong to. I have an enduring photograph which was taken by my son Sean, who spent some years living with nomadic people in Mongolia, and it's a photograph of a Mongolian herdsman making music on a piece of grass, a weed. I haven't heard the music, but Sean tells me it was quite beautiful, the way this man made music on a reed, and placing it in his mouth. And to some cultures, art is like breathing. I recall when Anne and I were travelling with our 2 small children, we now have 3 large children, in what is now Zimbabwe. It was Rhodesia back then. We were visiting Baha'i communities in this township, and people said, well, we said to them, well, how do we know that the houses all look the same? Where are the Baha'is meeting? They said, don't worry, just listen for the singing, and you'll find your way. And of course, there we were, the whole room was singing. Singing is a way of life. When I was traveling in Mongolia with my eldest son, Sean, in the Gobi Desert, we had an evening with all the camel drivers. We were riding on camels across the Gobi, and they said, oh, we're going to have a meal tonight all together in the traditional Mongolian style. We're going to sing. So when it came to our turn, all the Westerners said, we don't sing. And the Mongolians said, you don't sing? Sean said, Dad, to them, singing is like breathing. It's like saying to somebody, you don't breathe. Everyone sings. Absolutely everyone sings in that culture. We have a different kind of life. But to us, art is accessible now as it's never been before. You can find all kinds of beautiful music, painting, sculpture, simply with the press of a button on your computer. And then you can find your way to those places and see it firsthand. That also means that we have to be more discerning now, because a lot of art is a commercial product made purely to produce money. Now, I don't want to get precious about art. I sometimes watch, well, I always watch, Game of Thrones. I don't know whether I call that art, but I sure enjoy it. My guilty pleasure. And all sorts of popular music and so on. And so I don't want to sort of make art into a sort of exclusive province of special people with a special kind of intellect. It's not that. But it's a vast panoply, and you can access it. Sometimes, you know, it's very difficult for artists to produce their art. My hero in this regard is the 20th century composer Dmitri Shostakovich, whose music I revere and enjoy and plunge myself into whenever I can. Shostakovich lived for the whole of his life in fear of the despotic Soviet regime under the dictator Joseph Stalin, where he saw all around him artists and intellectuals being sent to gulags, to prison camps, where mostly they died, a lot of them just disappeared. And they were severely repressed. During his time, Shostakovich's music was publicly mocked by the Soviet regime, and he was harassed to produce works that would serve the aims of the state, music for the party and for the glorious cause of socialism. His reply to those mocking critics was musical. And he was able to do that under those really appalling circumstances. In a recent historical novel by Julian Barnes, who's a writer that I absolutely love to read, the book's called The Noise of Time, and the central character in that book is Dmitri Shostakovich, the composer. And in the book, the question arises, to whom does art belong? Art belongs to everybody and nobody. Art belongs to time and no time. Art belongs to those who create it and those who savor it. Art no more belongs to the people and the party than it once belonged to the aristocracy and the patron. Art is the whisper of history, heard above the noise of time. Art does not exist for art's sake, it exists for people's sake. But which people? And who defines them? He wrote music for everyone and no one. He wrote music for those who best appreciated the music he wrote, regardless of social origin. He wrote music for the ears that could hear, and he knew, therefore, that all true definitions of art are circular, and all untrue definitions of art ascribe to it a specific function. This is where I want to just offer a little note of caution. The point is, if you are tempted to define art or ascribe to it a specific function or aim, purposes, if you like, if you make that aim uppermost, if you create art for a specific purpose, you run the risk with the best of intentions of subverting art to the ends of propaganda. And this is precisely what Shostakovich resisted. And the result will be neither a true expression of religion, nor can it possibly produce worthwhile art. Now, I'm sure the Baha'is here will not do that. I'm sure that what you are doing with this lovely music that you're creating here and for the Baha'is in their Baha'i communities is to share the joy of their belief with others and to adorn their gatherings with beautiful art, beautiful music, to bring, in the words of the Universal House of Justice, luster to the cause of God. The experience of art should be a natural, central part of our lives. In the words of Abdu'l-Baha, art is sacred, an expression of the mystery of God that lies within each soul and that pervades the entire universe. Then, if we use art, let it be for a wider purpose, to explore the world of the spirit, the universe within each of us. Art should convey what it means to be truly human. But in researching all of this, you can't get away from the important role of religion in art throughout history. It was St. Augustine who said, "Language is too poor to speak of God, yet you do not like to be silent. What is left for you but to sing in jubilation?" For Baha'is, and people of other faiths, that's a very significant statement. In the introduction to the Oxford History of Christianity, I found this: "A work of art has an instantaneous impact. It bridges the gap between cultures in a single gesture. Whatever the culture from which it derives, a great work of art is a potential source of spiritual insight." The painter Kandinsky actually wrote a study called The Spiritual in Art in 1912. And he spoke about art as resembling religion in taking what is known and transforming it, showing it in new perspectives and in a blinding light. So, you ask yourself the question, well, do you have to be a believer to achieve this expression? Some of the masterpieces of painting and sculpture in the Christian tradition have been produced by artists whose status as believers is doubtful. I love the story about the Dominican monk who persuaded painters like Matisse, Braque, Chagall, and other great artists to do work for the Church of Passy in the French Alps. And his view was that all great art is spiritual, since the genius of the artist lies in the depths, the secret inner being from whence faith also springs. And the Catholic philosopher Jacques Maritain also wrote about this. He says, "To the Christian who wishes his art to reflect his religious convictions, he says this: keep this desire out of the forefront of your mind, and simply strive to make a work of beauty in which your entire heart lies. It is safer to turn to geniuses without faith than to believers without talent." Apologies for that. So the aim of every arts practitioner should be purely and simply to create art that is truthful. Music or drama or painting or sculpture that comes from the heart of the artist. And I think we're talking about religion in a much wider context. It was Abdu'l-Baha who said, religion is the outward expression of divine virtues. So, in the light of that statement, all true art may be seen as essentially spiritual expression. And all artists, whether believers or unbelievers, whether consciously or not, may be seen to express the qualities of spirit, of that deep well of spirituality. At an arts conference in Sydney I attended some years ago, a Brazilian actress, Denise Stockwell, said, "Art should make us stronger." That's a lovely statement, I love that. Not so much the purpose of art, but a byproduct, an outcome of that that spiritual impulse generated by artists to move hearts and minds. Of course, it's not reserved for believers. What a terrible thought. Think of the plays of Bertolt Brecht, so full of compassion and a sense of social justice. Beautiful statements about the human beings and about the way they live. Brecht was a communist and an atheist. There's no category in any of this. So, perhaps one of the greatest challenges for artists is to hold on to that goal of that inner journey, the quest for truth in the face of rampant, aggressive commercialism. That's not that simple, as it? Artists have to make a living. Tell me about it. Paradoxically, though, it's often those tensions, those conflicts, distractions and so on, which create great art. Often, the great art comes out of conflict, out of hardship, out of difficulty. Think of Van Gogh on the edge of mental oblivion, Beethoven giving birth to works of towering genius through years of deafness, and Bach with the blindness of his later years, Mozart buried penniless in a pauper's grave. And I don't just support art, which is, I don't think that the only art that is worthwhile is the one that speaks directly of the creator and his universe in sort of, feel-good terms of truth, beauty and roses, sunsets and so on. Artists should not feel compelled to sanitize their art. It may sometimes portray the darker side of nature. Not all art will bring the smile to our faces. Shakespeare talks to the actors in Hamlet. The players come to produce a play, which is going to shock the king into feeling guilty about murdering. And he speaks about the purpose of playing, whose end, both at the first and now, was and is, to hold as 'twere the mirror up to nature, to show virtue her own feature, scorn her own image and the very age and body of the time, his form and pressure. Art can be shocking, provocative, it can plead for justice, it can heal by catharsis. So it's no surprise that artists are often seen as dangerous. The late Roger White, distinguished Canadian poet, addressed a gathering of Baha'i youth in Haifa in 1990, and he described some of the ways in which artists affect our lives. Artists, not tricksters or conjurers, but committed artists, will be a vital force in preventing inflexibility in our community. They will be a source of rejuvenation. They will serve as a bulwark against fundamentalism, stagnation and administrative sterility. Artists call us away from formulas, caution us against the fake, and accustom us to unpredictability, that trait which so characterizes life. They validate our senses. They link us to our own history. They clothe and give expression to our dreams and aspirations. They teach us impatience with stasis. They aid us to befriend our private experiences and heed our inner voices. They sabotage our smugness. They alert us to divine intimations. Art conveys information about ourselves and our universe which can be found nowhere else. Our artists are our benefactors. Try telling that to successive Australian governments who continually strip funding away from the arts before they strip it away from anything else. Sorry, said my little piece there. Very strongly about that. Artists deserve our respect, if only for the brave journey that they undertake. Not putting myself in the category of brave, but I can tell you, it's very hard when you've been working as an actor, when people say to you, do you just act or do you work? share with you, which I found, and as an actor, it lifted my spirits. Actors are some of the most driven, courageous people on the face of the earth. They deal with more day-to-day rejection in 1 year than most people do in a lifetime. Every day, actors face the financial challenge of living a freelance lifestyle, the disrespect of people who think they should get real jobs, and their own fear that they'll never work again. Every day, they have to ignore the possibility that the vision they have dedicated their lives to is a pipe dream. With every role, they stretch themselves emotionally and physically, risking criticism and judgment. With every passing year, many of them watch as the other people their age achieve the predictable milestones of normal life: the car, the family, the house, the nest egg. Why? Because actors are willing to give their entire lives to a moment, to that line, that laugh, that gesture, or that interpretation that will stir the audience's soul. Actors are beings who have tasted life's nectar in that crystal moment when they poured out their creative spirit and touched another's heart. In that instant, they were as close to magic, God, and perfection as anyone could ever be. And in their own hearts, they know that to dedicate oneself to that moment is worth 1,000 lifetimes. I can never convey to people what it's like to be on that stage and to experience that. It's very, very special. It's not given to everyone, and there's a price you pay for it. If I were to give advice to a child, say one of my 7 lovely grandchildren, about to embark on the great adventure, the exploration of art in all its forms, and I offer this to you. If, as I'm sure you are, you're still plunging into the ocean of art and discovering new forms of art and new experiences, I'd say something like this: be bold, be brave, learn the language of art. Open your heart, your eyes and ears and your mind to art, the realm of imagination and inspiration which lies at the center of our very being. Forget any preconceived notions of taste. Step outside of fashion and be guided by your innermost senses. And whenever you say, "I know what I like," ask yourself if you don't really mean, "I like what I know." Search for truth in art as you would in life. And when you find a true artist, show them respect. Theirs is a sacred profession. that is, if you don't know it, that's the final movement from St. Matthew Passion of Johann Sebastian Bach, where the chorus says farewell to Jesus after his crucifixion. It's very moving music. It really will touch your heart very deeply. Thank you so much for sharing this with me this morning. Thank you.